This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Classes on God's plan for humanity and the Jewish people's role in the story. And just a quick review, even if you haven't seen the previous classes, no big deal. But we talked about how really, the whole purpose of creation is pleasure, and the highest level of pleasure is that relationship with God, which was lost. We really didn't go into that, but along comes Abraham and is able to figure out this idea of an infinite and invisible God, and dedicates himself to a unique mission, which becomes a national historic mission of the Jewish people. We talked about in the first presentation I did, World Perfect, where the Jewish people's role is really to return humanity to relationship with God and teach the world about the values that come from that relationship, which have become sort of the universal moral utopian vision of values for the human race. We talked about in the second class about anti-Semitism, which is the longest, deepest, most irrational universal hatred in the world. But all the excuses aside, basically it's a rebellion against the national historic mission of the Jewish people to bring humanity back to relationship with God and those values. And we have been dragging the human race kicking and screaming towards a vision of those values. And again, that's what anti-Semitism is ultimately about. Today, we're going to talk about pretty much the geopolitical realities of the Middle East, the Arab-Israeli conflict, and getting past all the smokescreen that it has something to do with the Palestinian national aspirations or even Islamic worldview about the West, but that the real deepest reason for this unending conflict that has been around since the founding of the Jewish state and way before, during the beginning of Zionism, and even before that, goes back to something that goes all the way back to the beginning of our history, who we are, and by looking at the book of Genesis, we're going to be able to get some really deep insights that will really bring this all together, the whole meaning, the message of what the Jewish people and the Jewish state are about, and what we're supposed to be doing as a people, what our role in the story is, and how we're supposed to really get to the end of that story, what the challenge is. So again, this is a PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to share a screen with you. Seems to have disappeared. Okay, here we go. There we go. So this presentation is called Israel and Ishmael, or Israel and Yishmael, the metaphysical roots of the Middle East conflict. And again, we're going to go into the deepest understanding of what really drives this unending conflict, but more importantly, it's going to give us, I think, a nice closure to the whole idea of what our role is in the story of the Jewish people and the Jewish state. So just to begin with, we have a concept that there's Ayin Panim b'Torah, the 70 faces of the Torah, that when you read a story in the Bible, there's the superficial plot line, and then there's the deeper levels of understanding, like peeling away the layers of an onion. So we're going to peel away a whole bunch of the outer layers, getting rid of the superficial plot line, and try and go deeper into what is really going on, which will again give us great insight into what our role is in human history and why we're constantly confronted by so many challenges. If we go to a quote in the Maimonides in the 12th century, was writing to the Jews of Yemen, who were under severe persecution at the hands of the Muslims in Yemen. And he wrote them a letter called the Letter to the Jews of Yemen, in which he states, "The nation of Yishmael persecutes us severely and devises ways to harm us and debase us. None has matched us in debasing and humiliating us. None has been able to reduce us as they have. We have done as our sages of blessed memory have instructed us, bearing the lies and absurdities of Yishmael. We listen, but we remain silent. In spite of all this, we are not spared from their wickedness and their outbursts at any time. On the contrary, the more we suffer and choose to conciliate them, the more they choose to act belligerently towards us. No matter how much we suffer and elect to remain at peace with them, they stir up strife and sedition. As David predicted, I am all peace, but when I speak, they are for war." You could almost put this on the front page of the Jerusalem Post today, because you know what they say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Nothing seems to have changed. The answer is what is really going on. So let's begin to peel back some of the layers and see what is behind this conflict and really get a broader view of what's going on in the world today. So Rabbi Chaim Vital, who is the main student of Rabbi Isaac Luria, we're talking about the 16th century. The Ari was one of the great mystical thinkers of modern Jewish history, meaning the last 500 years. He died at age 38. He only lived a few years in Sfat, but he had a profound impact on Jewish mystical thinking, Kabbalah. He wrote basically nothing, but his main student, Chaim Vital, recorded his teachings. And in his book, Eitz Hadas, he writes, "At the end of days, Israel is destined to experience the Ishmaelite exile. The fifth and last exile will be the most difficult of all. It is the exile of Ishmael." The picture in back, if you can see, is Daniel in the lion's den. Why is Daniel in the lion's den there? Because Daniel, the prophet living in Babylon, had this incredible, wild prophecy of a beast with 4 heads and different feet, and made of different materials, which was interpreted to be the 4 great empires that persecuted the Jewish people: Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome in the ancient world. So Rav Chaim Vital is bringing down an idea of a 5th exile at the end of days. Not necessarily an exile specifically being thrown out of the land, but a 5th persecuted the Jewish people, the exile of Yishmael. Again, this is not something we see in other sources really. But now we're going to go back into other sources and see where this comes out and what its implications are for us today. So before we do that, we have to understand a little bit about the characters, because we're going back into the book of Genesis and we have to understand a concept in Judaism. This is Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the great 18th century Jewish scholar from Italy, who wrote a number of books, Mesilat Yesharim, The Path of the Just, Derech Hashem, The Way of God. He talks about this idea of spiritual genetics. That has nothing to do specifically with Jews, but human beings. We not only pass on DNA to our children, father and mother to the children, but you can get different variations. It's always interesting to see how kids can look from the same parents, very different, daddy model, mommy model, hybrid model. But personality traits are passed on. And what we're being told is that the essential personality of who we are is innate in who we are when we're born. Sure, we can tweak it, we can change it a little, but it's like you can't change your genes. You can. So by looking at the personalities of in the book of Genesis, we understand the families and the nations that will come out of them. So the first person we want to look at, of course, is Abraham himself, because he's going to be the progenitor, the founder of not just Judaism, but ultimately other offshoot faiths and groups of people. But the essence of Abraham, if you see in Genesis, his person, what gives him the right stuff to be the guy who's going to make the family, it's going to make the nation that's going to change the world, is, you can see, he is a guy who is totally committed. In a world that has lost sight of God, he's a radically transformative, free-thinking super genius. He's able to think outside the box and connect to an infinite, invisible God when everyone else is ignoring it. Not only that, to know something is radically transformative is one thing, but to be able to push it on the world, truth regardless of consequences. Okay, he doesn't care what anyone thinks. He says, I choose to live if necessary to die for the reality of God. He is a driven guy, and also Abraham cares. Because to be driven for meaning but not care about the world doesn't mean much. He's really got the trifecta, the right stuff. And you'll see that the combination of the spiritual greatness, the spiritual DNA of Abraham and his wife Sarah will make that individual who will have really the right stuff. But we also have to understand there are other characters in the story. Now, Abraham is married to Sarah, but she's barren through her 90s, way past menopause. So what does she do to ensure that Abraham will have biological offspring? She knows she's not supposed to rely on miracles. As we say in Hebrew, ein somchin al hanes. So she goes and gives Abraham her maidservant, Hagar. Hagar, by the way, is not like some, hired help imported from South or Central America. She's the daughter of Pharaoh, one of the gifts that Abraham gets while he's in Egypt when he has to flee down there because of a famine. And she's a great woman in her own right. And again, not to go into this in too much detail, but unlike Sarah, her mistress, Hagar gets pregnant immediately and she gets arrogant. She gets chutzpahdik, like, if you're so great, how come you're not pregnant? And Sarah demands she be thrown out of the house. So she's thrown out of the house pregnant. And it says, an angel of God says to her, appears to her, says, I will greatly increase your offspring, and they'll become numerous to be counted. Behold, you will conceive. Now, it's interesting. She's already conceived. We're told, by the way, that she will miscarry this child and come back to Abraham and conceive again. Interesting little side point. And give birth to a son. And you shall name him Ishmael, for God has heard your prayer. We'll get to that in just a minute. And he shall be a wild ass of a man, and his hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand shall be against him, and over all his brothers shall he dwell. So this is Genesis 16. So we see that this is not Abraham and Sarah's child. This is Abraham and this Egyptian princess's child, Hagar. He has some of the characteristics of Abraham, but he's not exactly the right formula. Let's now go back into this quote, because this will give us tremendous insight into an important group of people who is a major character in this story. So you got the name Yishmael, and I've deliberately highlighted it differently. Yishmael, what does it mean? God will hear. God hears. We already know. And he's unusual. He's one of the only people in the Bible who is named before he's born, which is quite useful. She doesn't have to decide on the name. She can send out, like, WhatsApp on her WhatsApp group, Hagar, like what color clothes to buy, blue or green, no pink. But we're already told that because he's a child of Abraham, he has God's ear, so to speak. And if we look into that story, we understand that who does Yishmael become? His descendants will become the Arabs. By the way, the Arabs agree with this. This is one of the only things they agree on with us today, that they're literally our brother from another mother. We see that historically out of Abraham and his descendants, out of Judaism, will come historically and theologically two offshoot faiths, Christianity and Islam. The progenitor, the founder of Islam, will appear first, because Islam, that's a religion of the Arabs. Now, today, only 30% of Muslims are Arabs. Most Arabs are Muslims, but because Islam is spread everywhere, 70% of Muslims are not Arabs. But it starts out, as we'll see, as a religion of nomadic Arabic-speaking people of the Arabian Peninsula 1,300 years ago. Okay, so if we understand that that we pass on spiritual genetics, and Abraham and Sarah's descendant will be a mini version of them, then we understand that Yishmael's descendants will be basically, in terms of their collective personality, because all human beings are different, will sort of be a collective personality of Yishmael's personality. So we're going to look at Yishmael's personality as described in just those few sentences. I have to warn you, it's not politically correct, but reality is not politically correct. I'm not a big fan of PC. I always say I want to be politically correct. No one gets offended, but then, you miss the whole point, because truth is often not politically correct. So what does, in that whole comment is he's going to be a wild ass amongst men. It's really interesting, by the way. In Hebrew, when you look at an adjective and a noun, in English, the adjective comes before the noun, big boy. Whereas in how do you say big boy in Hebrew? It's Yeled Gadol. First you have the noun, then you have the adjective. So Pere Adam, we're told the essential essence of Yishmael is he's going to be wild. And the man characteristic is secondary. Rashi, the great medieval commentator on the Bible, who's almost always quoting midrash, rabbinic literature, ancient rabbinic literature that fills in a lot of the details. Rashi's also almost always answering obvious questions you should be asking when reading the text critically. He throws in here, he says he's one who loves deserts to hunt animals. He will be a bandit. All hate and attack him, and his offspring shall be great. It's an interesting quote. He's going to be desert. That's, by the way, the Arab ideal. The Bedouin today consider themselves to be the last pure, authentic Arabs, nomadic lifestyle. Bandit. He's into robbing and stealing. Again, not so politically correct, but the two biggest sources of early Islam are trading, like on the frankincense route, trade routes, and also raiding, stealing stuff. But he's going to be in constant conflict with everyone. Interesting thing. Now, again, not PC, but take Arabs/Islam out of conflicts and terrorism in the world today, and what percentage of them disappear? A very significant percentage, very significant, because much of the conflict in the world and much of the terrorism is coming out of Islam or Islamic Arab states fighting each other or fighting other people. Interesting. So it's an interesting statement. If we go back to, I want to go back up to, if I can get back to there. It's locked me out. Okay, never mind. We'll go forward. Another interesting commentary is by Onkelos. Onkelos Hager, who lived 2,000 years ago, Onkelos the convert, is the grandnephew of the Roman Emperor Titus, according to our tradition. He was a convert, and he does the Aramaic translation of the Bible, which Aramaic was the international language, the lingua franca of the Middle East 2,000 years ago. In the Second Temple period, when he was around, the spoken language on the street was not Hebrew, but Aramaic. He was like the art scroll guy of his day. And Onkelos is considered to be a man of such profound insight, even divine inspiration, that the words he picks give us deeper understanding of the words used in the original Hebrew. So he says this, he says, he will be a rebel against humanity. He's repeating what Rashi says. He's going to be fighting with everyone. And there's an expression with that quote we saw before in Genesis, is Yad Kol Bo. His hand will be in everyone, and everyone's hand will be in his. Like, it's a really weird, what does that mean to have your hand in everyone, everyone in his? So what does Onkelos translate that as? That he will need everyone, and all humanity will need him. Like, what does that mean? Now, Yishmael, Arabs, Middle East, he will need everyone will need him. What's that? Possibly the one word best definition that answers that one? Oil. Think about it. The Arab Middle East is literally a one commodity economy. Teeny tiny Israel at a little more than 6.5 million Jews and 10,500 square miles of territory is surrounded by 5.5 million square miles of 22 states of the Arab League with over 300 million people in them. Literally, Israel is a matchbox sitting on the sideline of a football field. That's the dimensions of Israel vis-a-vis the Arab Islamic Middle East. Yet, if you take oil out of the Middle East, imagine there's no oil in the Middle East, Israel's GDP is greater than all 22 states of the Arab League. Interesting. Oil's been a big curse for the Arab world. It's given them an incredible amount of money and influence that they haven't really worked for. It's just a natural resource. It's like being born looking good. You didn't work for it. And it's kept them from industrializing and democratizing. Interesting thing. So we understand that Yishmael, he is a child of Abraham. He is born into a monotheistic family. He has God in his name. He has God's ear. But he doesn't have the right stuff to become the Jewish people. Now look what Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, which is a midrashic collection, going back many, well, not 2,000 years, but it's quite old. It makes a comment on the Yishmael thing. Out of the 70 languages, there's an idea that there's 70 original nations in the world after the flood, that the Holy One, blessed be he, created in his world. He put his name El, which is one of the names of God, only on Yisrael. Since the Holy One, blessed be he, equates the name of Yishmael with the name of Yisrael, alas, who can survive him in Ishmael's day? Meaning, God puts his name on the Jews. It doesn't just mean that Yisrael has the name El in it. It means that we are literally the God squad. We are the nation supposed to represent God, the Jewish people. But Yishmael, okay, our half-brother, he has God's name in his name. So there's a level of connection with both God and with us that's kind of unique and special that we're going to be looking at throughout the remainder of this presentation. Now, let's fast forward in the story in Genesis 17, and the three angels come and they tell Abraham that Sarah supernaturally is going to give birth. That's Jewish history from our beginning until today. We never should have come into existence and we never should have survived. As Bishop Thomas Newton of Bristol, England said in the 18th century, he said the preservation of the Jew is the single greatest act of God's providence. It is, it's all supernatural. But when Abraham hears that his wife Sarah, menopausal, is going to give birth, his reaction is, oh, that Yishmael might live before you, meaning, God, you don't have to do it. I got a son. It's fine. God says back to him, nonetheless, your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. Notice the parallel structure here. And I will fulfill my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. Meaning, even though Yishmael is, this is so important, in Jewish law and in customs of the ancient Near East, the firstborn son, the first one out of the womb, regardless of which wife it comes from, is the firstborn. Abraham may have married Sarah first, but Abraham's firstborn son is Yishmael. He should have inherited the family business. What's the family business? Monotheism.org or monotheism.com. But God's saying, no, he doesn't have the right stuff. But it's going to be through Isaac. But as for Yishmael, I have heard you. And we see that a very righteous, spiritual, connected, prophetic guy like Abraham, words that come out of the mouths of the patriarchs and matriarchs, for better and for worse, have tremendous power of potentiality to shape things. So God says, I listen to you, Abraham. You say it, I'll bless him. I have blessed him and will make him fruitful, and I will increase him most exceedingly. He will beget 12 princes. Notice the parallel to the 12 tribes of Israel. I will make him into a great nation, but I will maintain my covenant through Isaac. So we already see that Yishmael, who's the older, who should have been the firstborn, who is a monotheist, who has God's name in his name, is pushed aside. We got to ask ourselves, what is Yishmael when he's old enough to be cognizant of this? What's he going to think about the fact that he has been shunted aside? Now, it says God was with the lad Ishmael, and he grew up, and he dwelt in the desert. He became an accomplished archer, and he sort of disappears out of the scene. He's gone. But he is always going to be running in the background as a person, and his descendants will always be running a parallel story to the story of the Jewish peoples. So let's keep that on hold, and we're absolutely going to come back to that later. Now, let's go back to a little deeper understanding of the consequences of Ishmael and his name, and his birth, and his relationship with Abraham. Again, this is Rav Chaim Vital again in Eitz Hadas, going back to the 16th century, commenting on this. Were it not for God who was with us, we would have perished in the Ishmaelite exile that he already mentioned. For as a result of having the title man, as a son of our father Abraham, he has the merit of his ancestors, an important concept in Judaism, zchut avot, that a lot of who we are and the merits we have and the things we get in this world are because of decisions and actions of our ancestors. The Jewish people collectively have a massive zchut avot. As we find Abraham saying to him, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you." He blesses him, he gets the blessing. To which the Holy One, blessed be he, answered him, "But as for Ishmael, I have heard you." He, Ishmael, also has the merit of circumcision. Remember, he's circumcised at 13 years old. This is an additional reason why he's called a man. This is why his exile is more severe than those imposed by others. The 4 other exiles we talked about in Daniel, which is Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. So now we understand that because he has a sort of spiritual connection, because he has God's name in his name, he's the son of Abraham, he has the ability to impact us even negatively in ways that other empires that are more disconnected from us in their roots cannot do. Now, it's interesting to point out the idea of circumcision. And remember, we say Ishmael circumcised at 13 years old. So look what the Zohar is, Jewish tradition says the Zohar is attributed to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, going back to about the 2nd century of the Common Era, when hiding in a cave with his son, Rabbi Eliezer, from the Romans. He wrote this incredibly profound, Kabbalistic, mystical commentary called the Zohar, which means the radiance, on the 5 books of Moses. The Zohar in the Torah portion Vayera, which is the book of Genesis, contains really a lot of cool stuff. It's a very hard book to understand. It contains a lot of cool stuff about the end of days and the Messiah. This is really interesting what he says now. Through his circumcision, Yishmael entered into the holy covenant before Isaac was born. Said Yishmael's guardian angel. Now again, let's hit the pause button. There's a concept in Judaism that all the original nations of the world have a guardian angel that advocates for them, except for us. We have a direct relationship with God. For better and for worse, he's always got his eyes on us directly. But the other nations have their own guardian angel. And so his job is to, so to speak, advocate for his nation to God, like a defense attorney. So Yishmael's guardian angel says to God, yet, as Yishmael has been circumcised, he ought to have a reward. Woe, that Yishmael was born into the world and was circumcised. What did the Holy One do? Like, what did God do? I mean, he fulfilled a big commandment. Everything you do right in this world, you got to get a reward for it, even if it's only in this world and you suffer in the next world. So what does God do? He banished the children of Ishmael from the heavenly communion, meaning he doesn't make them the chosen people, and gave them instead a portion here below in the Holy Land. He gives them payoff down here. He gives them the land of Israel because of their circumcision. And they, meaning his descendants, Arabs, Islam, are destined to rule over the land a long time, so long as it is empty, meaning empty of Jews. And they will prevent Israel from returning to their own land until the merit of the children of Ishmael shall have been exhausted. They get the right to hold on to the Holy Land until that merit is gone. And then the idea is, of course, the Jews will get it back. Let's look at this, by the way. Now, here's a nice satellite pic of Israel. When does the Arab Islamic world first arrive in the land of Israel? There to the right, off the side here, in our picture here, that's Saudi Arabia. In the year 638, Omar ibn al-Khattab conquers Jerusalem. The central square at the entrance to Jaffa Gate is named after him. And for the next 1,300 years, they will pretty much control everything, with one little break in the Crusades. And when do they lose control of the Holy Land? Basically, the very end of 1917. Ottoman Turkish Empire, remember, they're not Arabs, but they're Muslims. They'll have ruled the land for 400 years, from 1517 to 1917. At the end of World War I, the British will take it over. They lose control. How many centuries is that? 13 centuries. Whoa, interesting. Yishmael, 13 years old, circumcised. Interesting stuff. So let's do a quick review of Yishmael, and then we got to move on to another character in our story, and then put it all together. So we see Yishmael, his character traits. He's a monotheist. He has dedication, and he's idealistic. You get no indication from what little we see of Yishmael that he isn't a spiritually connected guy. He might be a wild guy. He might like to hunt, whatever, but hospitality. Remember that attribute that Abraham has, which is called chesed. He has a sort of variant version of it. The Arab Islamic, especially the nomadic Arab world, is famous for its hospitality. Nomadic Bedouin ideal. Confrontational, oil. He needs everyone and everyone needs him. His merits, but he's a child of Abraham. He gets a blessing because Abraham says to God, bless him, and God blesses him. He's a man of faith. He has hospitality, and he's got that big thing called circumcision. So now we know Yishmael, brother from another mother, major group of people, major monotheistic offshoot, who are still on the stage until today, where so many other peoples have disappeared into the history books and museums. Let's keep going in the story. Remember, Sarah gives birth to Isaac. Isaac will take a wife, Rebecca. Rebecca, after, a long period of being barren, at least a decade, she finally gets pregnant. And God says to her, and she doesn't know what's going on. She's got all this tumult going on inside of her womb, like pushing, shoving this back, forth, blah, 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 blah. And God says to Rebecca, he says, Shnei goyim v'vitnech. There's two nations in your womb. She goes for, what do you mean God says? She goes for a spiritual ultrasound. Today you have a problem, you go to get a sonogram or an ultrasound. She goes to see Shem and Ever, descendants of Noach, people who still had a connection, to get a spiritual read on what's going on inside of her. It says, two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from your inside shall be separated. The might shall pass from one regime to the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. It's like this. And so this is going to come out like not just two individuals, but we see that individuals can be progenitors for whole peoples. You're going to have two nations coming out of you. When her term to bear grew full, then behold, there were twins in her womb. The first one emerged red, entirely hairy, like a hairy mantle, so they named him Aesop. The name implies completed. After that, his brother emerged with his hand grasping onto the heel of Aesop, so they called him, from the word heel in Hebrew. He's holding, so his name is Yaakov. It's derived from the word heel. Now, by the way, I also have identical twin girls. They're 6 minutes apart. They looked so much alike. They used to give each other their clothes and say, put this on, I want to see what I look like. But their personalities were very different. But I noticed with twins that even though they're conceived at the same time, one is usually dominant in utero. And my daughter Sarah came out first. She was dominant in utero. She was the first one out, and she's still today a little bit taller than her twin sister Adina. But they're very different personalities. But here too, you can see that these guys come out, unlike my identical twins, these guys come out looking different and very different personality. Aesop comes out like fully made. He's like born with a beard. Gets the pickup truck, the shotgun rack, the mud flaps. He is a man of action, a doer. He's seems to be a natural leader of men. He's going to be the first guy ever picked. When you used to play dodgeball in elementary school, it was always the best athletes were picked first, and the wimpiest ones were picked last. I was always one of the last guys picked. He's the first guy picked, the leader of the team, a man of action. He's described as being, by the way, a really fast-talking guy. He's Sayan Bapiv. He hunts with his mouth. Doesn't mean he's a vampire or a lion. It means he's very deceptive, fast-talking guy. Okay, probably on a spiritual level, he's the great grandfather of all politicians or something. He knows how to got the gift of the gab, as they say, and he's very deceptive. He knows how to. Meanwhile, Jacob, if you see what comes out, it says Jacob is a nice, sweet boy. He's like sitting in the tent, his mother's probably, Jacob, put the scrolls away, go and get some fresh air. He's not particularly physical. He's as straight as an arrow. He's the guy Aesop's the worst guy to play poker with, because poker, we know, is just part of it is the cards you get. The rest is how much you can bluff. Poker face, Jacob is the worst guy, the best guy to play poker with. He doesn't know how to deceive. He's straight. He's not particularly physical. It says the lads grew up, and Aesop became a hunter, a man of the field. But Jacob was Ish Tam Yoshev Ohelim. He was the simple, pure kid sitting in the tent. And it says, by the way, that Isaac loved Aesop and Rebekah loved Jacob. I'm sure both parents love both their kids. But look, Aesop it's like I said with the twins, it's interesting. They're born at the same time, but the first one out considers himself to be the older one. And again, just like with Yishmael, notice the parallel. He is technically the firstborn. He is the leader of the family. He should get the family business. Monotheism.org. Firstborn son gets the special inheritance and unique responsibility. Okay? But what happens? We can fast forward to the story where one day Esau comes in from a day of hunting and violence, and he's hypoglycemic, his blood sugar's low, and he sees his brother, Jacob, is making some lentil stew, and he says, give me some of that. And Jacob says, okay, bro, you want it? Give me the firstborn rights. Like, make me the firstborn. Now, think about it. Any normal person would have said, are you kidding me? No way. For lentil stew, it's got to at least be some meat in there. I'm going to sell it for something of so little value? But that's exactly what he does. And the language in Hebrew is very truncated and succinct. Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate, and he drank, and he got up, and he left, and Esau belittled the birthright. What do we learn from Esau as opposed to Yishmael? He is not interested in spirituality. He's a total physical being. And he's also an instant gratification kind of guy. He just wants it now. So we understand that he's not an intrinsically spiritual guy. He is very physical and likes his stuff. So we fast forward to that famous story when Isaac is old and blind, and Jacob and he wants to give a blessing to his son Aesop. Now remember, words coming out of a spiritually connected person have huge power, potentiality to shape the course of human history and to shape your own personal destiny. He's also, what's he really doing in the story? Think about it. He's going to anoint Aesop to be the head of the family, which means you're going to become the guy who's going to put monotheism in the world. Now, Rebekah, remember, who knows, besides God, who knows you better than anyone? Your mother. She knows all your tricks, and she loves you anyway. Rebekah sees past. We see the women in the Bible in Genesis all see things their husbands, who are incredible human beings and prophets, don't see, because women have that added intuitive intelligence, Bina Yetera. She sees that there's something wrong with Aesop, and there's a lot more to Jacob that meets the eye. It is she who will engineer that really interesting story that when you see all these famous depictions of that story in Renaissance period and later art, when Aesop goes out to hunt to give his father good food so he'll be in a good state of mind to give him a good blessing, she is the one who will dress her other son, Jacob, in Aesop's clothes, put goat skin on his hands. One of the biggest questions I have in the Bible is like, how hairy was Aesop? You ever seen a goat? Must have been like cousin It in the Addams family or something. And he goes in to basically steal the blessing. Really interesting interaction. So he comes in dressed as his brother, and he says, come, father, and eat. And Isaac says to Jacob, because remember, he can't see, but his hearing is fine and his brain is working 100%. He says, come close, if you please, so I can feel you, my son. Are you indeed my son Aesop or not? So Jacob drew close to Isaac, his father, who felt him, and he said, the voice is the voice of Jacob's voice, but the hands are Aesop's hands. Hakol kol Yaakov hedayim yedei Esav, as we say in Hebrew. Now again, to peel off a few layers. Simple reading, you sound like one, you feel like the other. But if we look a little deeper into the story, see something very interesting. The voice is the voice of Jacob. I mean, think of what words are. It's really interesting. By the way, Onkelos, the translator of the Bible into Aramaic, when he's talking about Adam, who he is, he defines him as a being who speaks. Because what is speech? Think about what's happening right now. My brain is coming up with thoughts that are completely abstract, turning them into electronical impulses that are being fed to my mouth, my teeth, my lungs, my larynx. It's all moving in a coordinated way, sending sound waves across to the microphone. It's coming out your speakers, entering a drum in your ear, moving some bones, being retranslated into electrical impulses, which are being processed as abstract thought. That is unbelievable. Only human beings really have the ability to communicate at an abstract level. Even the animals that can, have some level of minimum ability to speak. Parrots forget, they're just literally parroting. And even like mammals like, whales, and they have whatever, and orangutans, they can type a couple hundred words. It's the vocabulary of a toddler. The ability to truly think and express in an abstract way. Speech is uniquely human. That is going to be, the voice is connected with speech, spirituality, and intellect. It's the ultimate manifestation of spirituality and intellect is speech and the voice. That is connected to Jacob, and Jacob is going to have literally his name changed to Israel because his 12 sons are going to make the 12 tribes. It's going to make the family. It's going to make the nation. We're being told that the true power of the Jewish people is not physical might. Remember that joke? What's the sign of maturity in the Jewish boy? When he recognizes statistically he's got a far greater chance of owning a professional sports team than ever actually playing on one. The power of the Jewish people is using our brains, okay, to outthink people who have an advantage, a physical advantage, teeny tiny Israel versus the rest of the world, Arab world, that kind of stuff. Okay, so we understand. But let's go to the hand is the hand of Aesop. So again, the human hand, by the way, is also unique. To have a thumb, a long thumb that faces your index finger, okay, makes humans uniquely dexterous. We have unique ability to manipulate things and create things and make tools and stuff like that. So the hand is uniquely human, but it's associated like the fist with physical might. Okay, that's associated with Aesop. Who does Aesop become, by the way? So Aesop we see is being associated with physicality, not spirituality or intellect. He becomes Edom. Edom, in Jewish tradition, will morph into Rome, the Roman Empire. The greatest empire in the ancient world in the West is Rome. For half a millennia, they're going to rule the entire Mediterranean. What an army did those guys have? And what will the Roman Empire eventually become? Rome will become, boom, two things: Western civilization and Christianity, which originally starts out as a singular faith, which is now split into many offshoots, the Roman Catholic Church. And remember, unlike Yishmael, who is only our brother from another mother, he's a half-sibling, Aesop has the same genetic material on a physical and a spiritual level. In theory, in potentiality, in him, which means we're being told on a certain level he is a greater threat and a greater rival, even though living in Israel today, we're not living in Europe. Okay, but we see traditionally, by the way, the animus, the hatred coming out of the Christian Western world has eclipsed even the animosity that we'll see that comes from Islam towards Judaism. Interesting stuff. Meanwhile, let's go back to our narrative because we got to get through here. Jacob steals the blessing. He leaves. Aesop comes back. And Isaac realizes he's been tricked. Now Aesop is upset because Aesop didn't care about the responsibility of being the firstborn, the spiritual national historic mission stuff. As they say in Hebrew, lo manyen oto. He doesn't care. Not interested. But that he thinks he's lost out on stuff, he's Mr. Instant Gratification guy. Boy, does he is really upset. And Aesop says to his father, have you but one blessing, father? Bless me too, father. He's like crying. So Isaac, his father, answered and said to him, behold, the fatness of the earth shall be your dwelling, and the dew of the heavens from above. By your sword shall you live, but by your brother shall you serve. Yet it shall be that when you are aggrieved, you shall cast off his yoke from upon your neck. Meaning, he got it, and he gets to keep it. You already sold him the blessing, your birthright, and he gets to keep his blessing. But you get your own blessing. But he only gets to maintain his leadership position in the family if he does what he's supposed to do. And if not, you can give him hell, literally. Interesting. So Rashi translates that. When Israel transgresses the Torah, you will have the right to be aggrieved that he's taken the blessing. He only got it because he wanted the responsibility. So now that he wants it, he's got to live up to it. Interesting little side point, by the way, in Genesis, which we often read through, we don't notice that Aesop, who was very big, had one mitzvah, one commandment, honoring his father. Doesn't say anything about honoring his mother, but kibud av, he really was concerned that his father should be pleased with him for whatever reason. And he knows that, his father doesn't want him marrying the local Canaanite girls who are, we see that the four mothers want them to marry women from their own family. They'll go back to Turkey, Haran, to marry these women who have the right stuff to make the Jewish people. But in this case, Aesop perceived that the daughters of Canaan were evil in the eyes of Isaac, his father. So Aesop went to Yishmael and took Mahalat, the daughter of Yishmael, son of Abraham. So you see that there's even going to be, on a biological level, a merging of Aesop and Yishmael in terms of they're going to have children, hybrid, within the family. It's kind of a little bit incestuous, but that's what happened back then. We know, by the way, that Jacob's going to have to flee for his life. He flees for his life he goes to live with his uncle. Rebecca says, go to my brother Lavan, Mr. White. Never trust anyone named Mr. White, by the way. He's the most dishonest guy. It's interesting, by the way, that we see that Jacob, who's like this Ishtam Yoshev Ohalim, the really straight, pure guy, has to deal with the two most deceptive guys, I think, in the entire Bible, his brother Aesop and Lavan the trickster. And he may able to use that higher intellect, even though he's at a disadvantage, to outmaneuver them. Like Mark Twain, the great writer, said. He said, the Jew made a marvelous fight in this world in all ages and has done it with his hands tied behind him. And has been disproportionately impactful. But this is where it comes from. Anyway, we know he flees to Haran. He sees his first cousin, Rachel. He falls in love with her, but he's tricked by Lavan into marrying the sister Leah. And he marries Leah. And then this big competition for kids starts. And Leah is very fertile. And Rachel is barren. So Rachel then will give her maid servant, parallel to the story we saw previously with Sarah and Hagar. Bilhah will be given to Jacob as a second wife, as actually a third wife in this case, and she will start having kids. Then Leah will stop having kids, so she will give her maidservant Zilpah. And it's a really wild story we don't have time to go into, but this competition breaks out to give birth to these kids, and we have two kids, and Leah will have 6 boys and a girl. It's sort of like the competition to make the all-star team. The purification process is done, and now we're making the finished product, the family that's going to make the nation, that's going to change the world, the Jewish people. And also Lavan, the trickster, not only lying about which daughter to marry, he's also trying to keep Jacob under his thumb by keeping him impoverished and not letting him earn the money through his hard work. And he's able to outsmart Lavan and basically accrue massive wealth in the form of massive herds of goats. In the end, he realizes that he has to leave. He cannot stay. Good lesson for us. There is no long-term future in diaspora. You have to come back to the land of Israel. So he packs up his belongings. He goes back. This is 22 years after he stole the blessing. Remember that expression, time dulls all pain? Not with Aesop. So he's coming back to Aesop, and Aesop's coming out to meet him with 400 men. And that famous story, which we should all learn from, Jacob follows the 3-pronged strategy of how you're supposed to act in this world. Number 1 is you don't rely on miracles. He sends gifts. He's sending his brother tons of stuff. He knows his brother loves stuff. Goats and sports cars and flat screen TVs and the latest iPhone. He's sending everything to him. Number 2, he prepares to fight. He splits his camp. Number 3, he prays. Because you got to recognize, you got to make all the efforts you can in this world, but God runs the world. You got to be balanced in that approach, always. Okay? And he meets. Does Aesop kill Jacob? Well, thank God he doesn't. We wouldn't be here. But it's very clear from the story that he is still really, really, and Rashi, the great medieval commentator, he says, Halacha hi b'yaduah Aesop senot Yaakov. He hates us. He does not like us. But he does, and he's overcome by the emotions of the moment, and he makes an offer to his brother Jacob. He says, come with me to Mount Seir where I live. We'll go into business together. Can you imagine that? The Roman Empire with a Jewish CEO, they'd probably still be in existence and making a big profit. But Jacob realizes he can't live with his brother. He's bad news. He's dangerous. His kids will be a bad influence on my kids. But he can't tell them get lost. So he very obsequiously, very fawning way, he goes, no, my master, my lord. He says to travel on and let us go, and I will travel alongside. But Jacob said to Aesop, let my lord go ahead of his servant, that I will make my way in a slow pace until I come to my lord in Seir. You go on ahead, I'll catch up later. Now we know if it's coming out of his mouth, it's going to have to happen sometimes. But we also know that he has no intention of living with his brother. He's just trying to get rid of him. But if he said it, it's got to happen. So Rashi, the great medieval commentator from Troyes 1,000 years ago, jumps in and says, and when will Jacob catch up to Esau? Rashi, Genesis 33:14. And when will Jacob, go to Seir? In the days of the Messiah, as it says. And here he's quoting the prophet Obadiah. He says, Va'alu Moshim lahar Tzion l'shpotat har Esav. And a redeemer, a savior will arise from Mount Zion to judge the mountain of Aesop. Meaning, he's saying, Aesop, you just want your stuff. You're an instant gratification guy. You can't wait. You go on ahead. Edom, Roman Empire, Western civilization. You build your empires. You get your industrialization. You get your stuff, your materialism. But in the end of days, you too might have my brother, who have been in such conflict with me, in such animus. You will eventually recognize that I'm willing to wait. We Jews are in it for the long term. We got the end game in mind. We'll wait, and you can. At the end of the days, that's when it'll all be balanced out. So let's do a summary of Aesop. Let's put it all together, because then it gets really cool. So we see that Aesop, his character traits, is a hunter. He's a man of action. He's materialistic and physical, deceptive and violence. But he has merits. He's a child of Isaac. He gets a blessing. He has to be rewarded for honoring his father. And he never leaves the land of Israel. Okay, so let's put that on hold. Let's fast forward now. That's the beginning of the story, Genesis. Let's fast forward to the end. There's a certain scenario talked about. Now you have these two great offshoots. Now we have, Arabs and Islam, Aesop, Western civilization, Europe. These two offshoots will coexist in the world and also exist with the Jewish people, although we are, as a teeny tiny people, kind of shunted to the side as these two guys are going to duke it out for dominance, especially in the Western world. Now the Zohar, again, the book of Jewish mysticism in Parshat Vayera, jumps in and says, and the sons of Yishmael will fight many battles in this world. The sons of Edom, Aesop, will gather against them and make war against them, some on land, others on sea, some close to Jerusalem, and one shall prevail over the other. Back and forth, seesaw. But the Holy Land will not be delivered to the sons of Edom. We see it's already promised ultimately to the Jews, but in the interim, the Yishmael's children get to keep it. Here you got a picture of the Crusades. So these guys are going to duke it out. There's this idea that we're on the sidelines. We're an insignificant people. Theologically, both of these faiths, Islam and Christianity, practice what's called theologically supersessionism. That, God chose Abraham and the Jews, but then they were rejected for various reasons, and we are chosen instead. And all their physical fighting is part of a bigger theological, historical battle to prove that they are the ultimate true faith that has replaced Judaism as what should be the true faith in the world. So we have that idea. And we see that this is exactly the reality of what's gone on. We have going on in the world today a war of radical Islam, often fed by Iran, but you have Al-Qaeda, you have ISIS, you have it going on everywhere in the world, this conflict. It's the number one source of tension and terrorism in the world today. But then on the other hand, we also have we have this conflict of Aesop versus Yishmael, but then we have to ask ourselves a question. They seem to be at odds, but what do these people here? Some pretty scary pictures. I love the one in the upper left-hand corner. He's saying like smile. In the lower left-hand corner, it's in Iran, two gay men being publicly hung in Tehran. What do these people have in common with? These are the Ishmaelite descendants, Arabs, Islam. Remember, Iranians, not all Arabs, but they're Islam. What do they have in common with these people? And these are images of Europeans, and you can see from this picture exactly what they have in common. There's only one issue that they'll come together on, and I've seen it live, like years ago in Manchester University, where you have the left-wing, openly gay activist with a keffiyeh wrapped around, his neck, with his arm around a jihadi Muslim guy. There's only one issue, and that's on delegitimizing Israel and bashing Jews, even though they don't necessarily say bashing Jews, but it's definitely going after Israel. And we know that Israel bashing is just the final form that anti-Semitism is taking in the modern world. Because we have to understand something else. At the end of days, we have, the children of Yishmael, the children of Aesop are going to duke it out, but in Jewish sources, we have another concept. The Zohar, again in Bereshit, says the children of Yishmael are destined at that time, in the end of days, to incite all the nations of the world to come to Jerusalem, together with them, as it is written in Zechariah and Zechariah, I will gather all the nations to Jerusalem for war. Despite all the conflict and the tension in Islam versus the West and yada, 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 the one issue that they can unite on is coming after the teeny tiny Jewish state. The Jewish people, 0.2% of the world's population, of half of whom live in the land of Israel. And this is talked about in the book, in Ezekiel and Zechariah, in the later books of the Bible, as the war of Gog and Magog, which is described, we don't know, it's these names are used, Meshech and Tuval. We have to understand when these prophets are seeing these images, they're not meant to be taken literally. They talk about armies and chariots. Obviously, fast forward thousands of years later, you got fighter planes, tanks, artillery, and missiles. We're not sure what the nations are. So when you read these, you got to keep in mind, what's the theme? What's the message? You can stand back. Forget the technology and the specifics. That's not important. But we're told at the end of days, okay, the Arabs and the Christian world, Europe and the Middle East might be duking it out, but they will put their differences aside or even continue to fight at that time. But the one thing that they will agree on is coming after us. Surely on that day, you will come from your place in the utmost parts of the north, you and many peoples with you, all of them a vast horde, a mighty army. And you advance against my people Israel like a cloud covering the earth. It will be at the end of the days that I will bring you upon my land in order that the nations may know me. Interesting. I like the north thing, because north of Israel. North is Europe. By the way, the only reason why Israel cannot completely hammer like people like in Gaza for launching thousands of missiles at us is because they're being shielded by the Europeans. The repercussions of international condemnation and pressure, even if they're not physically attacking, and whether it's through the UN and the crazy number of UN General Assembly resolutions. By the way, there have been more resolutions condemning Israel out of the UN than every other country in the world combined in the last 40 years. So even if it's not necessarily a physical attack, we see it's those that are physically attacking us and those behind them backing them. And it doesn't mean that every Arab and every European is an anti-Semite either. We're talking about the big picture here. Now, Maimonides says something very interesting. And it's unusual for Maimonides to say this stuff. Maimonides is a very kind of rational, legal thinking guy. His writings don't contain tons of stuff about prophecy. It's not his way of thinking. Maimonides would not have been like a Hasidic kind of guy. That's not his thing. His thing is very rational thought kind of stuff. But regarding the time of Messianic era, it has already been made clear from the words of Daniel, Isaiah, and the rabbis of blessed memory that the coming of the Messiah will take place when the hand of Edom and the Arab world will be mighty, and their rule will spread throughout the world. There is no doubt about this. For as it says, he will see a chariot and a pair of horsemen, a chariot with a donkey, that's from Isaiah, and a chariot with a donkey is the Messiah. The pair of horsemen represents men of war. This is to say the alliance of two nations, Edom and Yishmael. So here he's writing in this letter to the Jews of Yemen who are undergoing persecution to try and strengthen them that this is part of a process. You got to keep the end game, the big picture in mind. He's saying that you know that the end is approaching when you see these two forces that are so opposed to each other, theologically and historically and politically, are going to come together to come after the Jewish people. When you see that alliance, you know that the end is in sight and the Messiahs are just around the corner. And Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, the Ramak, who is a great rabbi who is in the same generation as Rabbi Yosef Karo and Rabbi Shlomo Levi Alkabetz, who wrote Lecha Dodi. This is the generation before the Ari, Rabbi Isaac Luria. Rabbi Isaac Luria came to learn from Moshe Cordovero, who is a great mystical thinker. He says all the nations will ready themselves against Jerusalem and make peace amongst themselves. They will turn against Israel to annihilate it for having established its own government. It will be a time of distress for Jacob, for Yaakov, yet they will not collapse, but be saved from their distress. So it says they're going to put their differences aside and fight against us. The pressure is going to be really intense on us, but we're always going to survive. We're promised that the Jewish people will make it out, sometimes just by a little bit, very badly beaten. So what do we see? To put it all together, guys, bottom line, time's running out here. We got a three-way struggle going on in the world. We got the original monotheists in history. It's the Jews, Jacob, Israel. Then we have the offshoots. We have Aesop, Western Christianity, Western world and Christianity. When you have Yishmael, the Arabs, and Islam. So you got this three-way thing going on. We have Aesop and you have Aesop and Yishmael duking it out. But on a theological level, on a deepest level, we see it's a three-way struggle, and both of these people feel inferior because they're really offshoots of us, and we never abrogated our claim. We've always said that God doesn't reject. God never chose. He says over and over again, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, even when these guys are born, he says, he always reaffirms his commitment and his claim through the bloodline of Abraham, through Isaac, through Jacob, through his children. That is ultimately, not at a physical level, but on a spiritual level, this is B'ni B'chari Yisrael. Israel is my firstborn son. So now we understand what's really going on and why things are going on in the world the way they are, and why you can also have the Islamic world in confrontation with Western civilization, but at the same time, both of them bashing us. Now, but I want to end on a final note here, because there's a great story. In the book of Genesis, remember, Yishmael is born first. He's circumcised at 13 years old, and he feels slighted because he's been bypassed, and the Jewish people's status is being passed on to his half-brother, who is younger, Isaac. So Yishmael would pride himself over Isaac, because Rashi's quoting a midrash here, because he was circumcised at the age of 13 and did not object. Isaac said to him, Yishmael, do you try and scare me because of one organ? I mean, because you're circumcised, that little, the circumcision thing? If the Holy One, blessed be he, would say to me, sacrifice yourself before me, I would not refrain from doing it. So Yishmael is trying to say, I'm more of a gever. I'm tougher than you. You got circumcised at 8 days old. A baby at 8 days old doesn't know what's happening. And it's actually, it's fast and quick. But a 13-year-old, he knows exactly what's coming. Who's tougher? But Isaac, these guys are duking it out. What's the essential issue? Who can be more committed to being connected to God? Who's going to put more on the line? And Isaac says, I'll put my neck on the line. By the way, what's the next Torah portion that appears after this Rashi and this story? The binding of Isaac's story. God says, okay, you said it. You opened your mouth. Let's test it. And that's the famous story where Abraham takes Isaac as an offering. And Isaac, by the way, willingly goes. It's considered a test for Abraham. Isaac is a real do the right thing kind of guy. Interesting. So guys, but let's focus on the essential thing as we close here. The essential issue, because we talked about Yishmael versus Israel, is unlike Aesop, Ishmael has always remained a very spiritually dedicated kind of guy. He is not necessarily the instant gratification. He really, until today, his descendants feel slighted. And therefore, everything Yishmael and Islam has done in history is like the mirror image of Judaism. When I say mirror image, if you hold something in your right hand in the mirror, unlike in a camera now, I see it's my right hand in the camera holding it. If you look in a mirror, it's your left hand holding it. It's the mirror image. It's almost warped. It's the opposite. It seems the same, but it's not exactly. Let me explain now as we close. And you can see exactly this. We say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The essential statement of Judaism is, Hear Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. They say what's called the Shahada. La ilaha illa Allah wa Muhammad Rasul Allah. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger. That's the essential statement of Islam. We have Brit Milah. They have their circumcision. Okay, they do it at a later date, not at 13, by the way. I've never met a Muslim who does it at 13, but they do it later. We pray 3 times a day, but they got to pray it 5 times a day. This is like, remember, Annie, get your gun. Anything you can do, I can do better. I can do anything firmer than you. I can be more dedicated than you in everything. We bow at the waist. When we pray, they bow all the way to the ground. We give tzedakah 10%. They give zakat, which is 2.5% of their entire wealth you're supposed to give to charity. We have Olei Regel, where during the time of the temple, you're supposed to go up, Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot, to Jerusalem. They have Hajj, where Muslims are supposed to at least once in their life visit Mecca. We have kashrut. They have halal, their own sort of kosher version of kosher laws, not as strict as ours. We have halakha. They have Sharia. Islam, unlike Christianity, they have madrasim. They have schools of law, and they have and Sharia, like halakha, covers all aspects of your life. We have Yom Kippur. We fast for 1 day. They fast for 30 days on Ramadan. We have Shabbat. They have Friday. Okay, it's their holy day. We have the binding of Isaac story, the Akedah story. They have a holiday called Id al-Adha, the Feast of the Sacrifice, which doesn't take place in Israel, but that's where Abraham takes Yishmael to sacrifice him, to test for him, but it's with Yishmael. We have Tikkun Olam, where we're supposed to be fixing the world. They have Jihad. They're going to conquer the world. We have modesty, sniyut. They have the hijab, the niqab, the burqa. They take it to levels of extreme that are unbelievable. We have Kiddush Hashem, where we give up our lives for what we believe is true, and they go and blow up other people for what they believe is true. Again, it's just anything you can do, I can do better, more extreme, even warped way of doing things in an intensity that lacks the balance that Judaism has. But what's the essential statement that they're making? It's not fair. I am dedicated. And until today, the Muslims are saying, I can prove that I am dedicated. I deserve it more than you, even though we know it's not true. Even though there's things off in his character, which you can see in how they're behaving and how extreme they take so many things. But we understand, therefore, that the essential challenge is not Israel-Palestinian issue. It's not even about the Islamic attitude towards the world, about the world being subjugated by them, or the treatment of non-Muslim monotheists as second-class citizens. On the deepest level, this rivalry goes back to that initial story, and it's all about commitment and a certain spiritual mission. So what's the lesson for us as a close? Maimonides says it beautifully here. Now he's writing to the Jews of Yemen, but he's speaking to us today. He says, and now, brothers, you must pay attention and listen carefully to what I am going to lay out before you. Let not the strength of our enemy's hand and our own nation's weakness frighten you. For this entire situation is no more than a trial and a test so that you can demonstrate your belief and your chosenness to the world. Meaning, the job of the Jewish people is not to fanatically conquer. I said there's no Jewish empires in history except for Hollywood, and it hasn't been a source of Jewish values. Our job is to be balanced Jews, by the way, in terms of our relationship to God and those commandments like Kashrut and Shabbat, and how we treat our fellow human beings and our fellow Jews. Balance is the key, and the Jewish world is very unbalanced, by the way. Our job is to live individually and collectively as balanced Jews with that incredible system of the Torah that we got, and to create individuals, families, communities, and a nation that is the role model for the rest of the world. The idea is if we do it right, which is Kiddush Hashem, that's our job, to live and act in a way that inspires others individually and collectively. If we do it right, then the world will line up behind us as it's promised. And Yishmael and Aesop and his descendants, Islam and Christian, they will drop their differences. They'll follow behind us and say, we see you got it right all along. You really are, maybe not biologically the firstborn, but you are the God squad. Now show us how to do it correctly. And that, by the way, is the lesson we have to learn from the story. Okay, let's stop sharing here. There's my website if you want to take a quick look, kenspiro.com. And here we are back. Guys, we put it all together. Now we understand that from the time of Abraham on, we have a unique role to play in the story. It is a responsibility we cannot escape, by the way. Everything is riding on our shoulders. That means we need Jews for Judaism. We need balanced Jews who are as careful about how they treat their fellow human beings as they are in being careful about how kosher is the food they eat and how modest is the clothing they wear. When we have Jewish individuals and community that is a living manifestation of what Abraham was going back thousands of years ago, and we really have that God squad, then we really are Jews who fulfill our unique mission in history and create the role models that the world so badly needs. And then we finally get the world will stop fighting, stop arguing, line up behind us, and we will all live together in peace and reconnect the world to God, which is the whole purpose of creation. Guys, thanks so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure. You're welcome to visit my website, kenspiro.com. Again, I got tons of content. You can reach me on that website, and I look forward to, when things return to normal, post COVID-19, post-coronavirus. BC is before Corona, and we'll have AC after Corona. You all come to Israel, ideally permanently, because Messiah is on the way, and you want to get the property now while it's affordable. Guys, take care. Have a great day. Enjoy and be healthy.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.